think the line is a bit short now. Thank you for getting here early, those of you who did. And those who are still coming will still get to ask all the questions. They might just miss this initial update that I'm going to give about some more legislative activities for about 10 minutes. And then folks should all be in. So it's been very interesting times we live in. The most recent success we're coming off of is preventing the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Replacement bill and the bill that was designed to replace. Over 20 million people have lost their insurance or removed protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Rates would have been projected to increase for people buying insurance commercially 15 to 20%. So it was a disaster of a plan. And frankly, what led to its defeat, while we all know, of course, the role that Senator Murkowski, Senator Collins, and Senator McCain played, frankly, what really defeated it was you. That was you who did that. It was the massive marches, the letters, the calls. That is truly what changed this. Those senators and representatives who opposed it, that didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of the massive outpouring of support. People who were just stepping up and saying, what about my son with diabetes? What about my daughter who's had breast cancer? And that made an enormous difference. Now, that battle isn't over. Just yesterday, are you having trouble hearing me?
Is this better? That's much better. A big difference. What you might have missed is that I said you deserve the credit, and thank you for defending the Affordable Care Act. It wouldn't have happened without you. In our Colorado representatives, Diana DeGette, Ed Perlmutter, myself, Senator Bennett, all of course voted the right way. But again, truly, what made the difference was those calls and those letters and those marches, and it was impossible to ignore. Now, the efforts aren't over. It was just yesterday that Vice President Pence said that they're going to continue to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But we do think we have an opportunity now for Democrats and Republicans to work together to fix the Affordable Care Act and make it work better. My guiding principle will always be, does the proposed change increase the number of people covered? Does it reduce costs? And does it maintain or improve quality? So if it meets those criteria, then let's do it. Let's make it happen, right? We're not going to get into a negotiation where they say, okay, we're no longer kicking 21 million people off of insurance, we're only going to kick 10 million people off. That's not a discussion we're interested in having. We're talking about covering more people, reducing costs, improving quality. And there is already some bipartisan blueprints to do that. There's a group called No Labels Problem Solvers that I'm part of that put out a bipartisan white paper, 20 Democrats, 20 Republicans, with some areas we think we can find common ground to make the Affordable Care Act work better. We'll see if leadership on either side takes that up. In addition, I would really like to see Congress focus, rather than just on the insurance piece, on some of the cost drivers in healthcare. And so we have a number of ideas to do that. Everything from reimportation of prescription drugs to negotiated rates for prescription drugs to a number of Medicare reforms and reference pricing. To pricing transparency for providers to help the market mechanism work better to bring down costs. So if we can do more on cost containment, even with the existing pot of money, we can expand coverage, right? And so that discussion hasn't happened yet, but there are certainly people on both sides of the aisle interested in that. As you know, in addition to the Republican replacement for the Affordable Care Act being bad on the merits, the process was very bad. They didn't allow any amendments from Democrats or Republicans. I offered 3, they were all voted down on a partisan vote. But the reason I bring that up is one of those amendments was about pricing transparency, requiring providers right now, the same procedure might be billed out at 6 different rates to different insurers and another one for self-pay. And that prevents the normal mechanisms of the market from working in a competitive way to reduce costs. So after I introduced that amendment, in a committee and it was voted down, a Republican came up to me and said, you know what, that's a good idea, why don't we work on a bipartisan bill to do that? So I think there's a lot of interest, and by the way, reimportation of prescription drugs is bipartisan support too. So let's look at some of those. And then whatever we do on the insurance, the coverage side, since we'll have reduced costs, our dollars will go further. So that's the focus there. The other 2 big things that President Trump said they wanted to accomplish are tax reform and infrastructure. Infrastructure was one that President Trump talked about, but Speaker Ryan and Mitch McConnell never really were behind. They never really want to do infrastructure. I'm still very dubious that that will occur. It requires an investment. It's not, nor should it be exclusively public-private partnerships or toll roads like they talk about. It needs to be a public investment in upgrading our roads, our bridges, 21st century information infrastructure like rural broadband. That's what we would look for in an infrastructure package. And I'd love to see that. And we did a letter detailing our priorities for Northern Colorado in that. I'm not holding my breath with this current Congress, and I don't know how far the president really believes in that or wants to push that. The other area is tax reform. They're going to make a serious effort to do that. The concept is a very good one. It means let's get rid of loopholes, special interest tax expenditures, and then use that to bring down rates for everybody. And that's the goal, but there's several problems with the actual proposals to do that. President Trump's proposal is not budget neutral. It would put an enormous increase in the deficit. So it's a tax cut for the wealthy, basically all paid for by future generations. Enormous. The revenues are far less than what it costs. So it's really not a revenue neutral tax reform. The House one by Kevin Brady and Paul Ryan, their proposal, it is revenue neutral, but it relies on a very bad mechanism to get revenue that they call the border adjustment tax, which is effectively a 20% tariff on imported products. Bad for a couple reasons. One is it would likely lead to reciprocal tariffs, which would kill our manufacturing jobs here in Colorado and agriculture. But two, it's regressive. Like any sales tax, it's very regressive. A 20% tax, think on almost anything at Walmart, any clothing that's imported. Who that hits a much higher percentage of your income for somebody making 30, 40, 50,000 a year than somebody making 200, 300,000 a year. So it's the opposite. It would increase the tax burden on the middle class and working families at the expense of pulling down rates at the very top. So it's not a good candidate for where we get the revenue. We've offered, and I've offered several other ideas, along with I think 17 other Democrats. We led a letter saying let's make a carbon tax the center of tax reform as a way to get the revenue to bring down rates. That would be, I think, the best way to get Democrats on board. Other alternatives would include a very low, broad-based VAT tax to bring down, value-added tax to bring down rates. But I think we'd be open to those. We'd be excited about a carbon tax to bring down your income tax. I think a VAT tax doesn't excite anybody, but it's fine if you bring down rates and you simplify taxes and you get rid of special interest tax loopholes. So those are out there, but as long as it's revenue neutral, there's potential there. And it's something that I think Paul Ryan really wants to do. I think the president wants just to claim victory about something, right? I don't know if he knows what's in it or cares what's in it, but he wants something that reaches him. So I wouldn't write it off. We're going to work on it when we go back in September. It is a potential for a true bipartisan achievement if we get it done. So those are the big things that we're doing. But I want to share some encouraging news with you. We are now seeing in two instances, just in the last few weeks, that the Republicans in the House and Senate are getting a bit of a backbone to stand up to President Trump. And they're two very substantial things. The first, and one is just in the Senate, the other is bicameral, but the Senate one is that they chose to remain in pro forma session over summer, preventing President Trump from doing recess appointments to positions. And that's unexpected, because they did it to President Obama, but we expected that, right? Because they were Republican Senate, they said you shouldn't be able to appoint people. But they're basically doing it to President Trump, saying you have to send your nominees through our approval. We're not letting you put them in for the rest of the legislative session. Otherwise, those recess appointments, they'd be there for a year and a half till the next Senate election. So they're not allowing President Trump to get away with that, which shows that even the Senate Republicans, of course, joined by the Senate Democrats, don't fully trust him. The second was even more substantial. Overwhelmingly, the House and Senate passed a bill that removed the authority of the president to remove the sanctions against Russia. And I think there were 4 or 5 votes against it in the House, and the president signed it because he knew that it would have been overturned had he not signed it, which would have been an additional embarrassment. He didn't like it. He, said mean stuff about it and tweeted mean stuff about it, but he signed it because, that would have looked even worse to have his veto overturned. But that shows that overwhelmingly, again, only 4 or 5 votes against us in the House, and it did also have Iran and North Korea sanctions in it, but overwhelmingly, even the House Republicans, Senate Republicans said, we're not sure we can trust this guy on Russia policy. There's a pending investigation of an independent counsel about collusion. In addition, there's allegations that there might be financial ties or he might be financially beholden to Russia. And the fact that that was such an overwhelming vote against the staunch opposition of the president is significant. So I think we're starting to see it. So those are 2 pieces of good news. We hope there's more, but those are both substantial. They really are. And I think they're one of the reasons that President Trump seems increasingly frustrated and volatile in terms of his own pronouncements. We're also able to make progress on some of the smaller issues. And, we talked about, healthcare and taxes. Those are big things. But just so you know, there's a lot of work at Congress, doesn't often go reported, but we're working together almost every day on bills. I passed 3 bills through the House this session. 2 of them were land-related bills. 65% of the district I wanted to represent is federal land and public land, so we did pass the boundary adjustment in Grand County to extend the borders of Rocky Mountain National Park to include some inholdings. And we did a boundary adjustment in Eagle County that both passed the House. Continuing to work on additional 50,000 acres of wilderness in Eagle and Summit County to preserve them in perpetuity. And then we also passed a bill for the Email Privacy Act, which is a bipartisan bill I authored to require that the federal government get warrants to search old emails. So work continues. And another bill that I actually think we'll get through, I've introduced this bill ever since I've been in Congress, but I think we'll actually get through this time, is to legalize industrial hemp production nationally, right? So it's legal in Colorado, farmers can't get the seed. This is just for, clothing, and right now we basically import all of our industrial hemp from Canada and other countries, and we want to allow Colorado farmers to grow it. And we've introduced this bill for a while. I work with Representative Comer of Kentucky on it. Thankfully, we have an ally, Mitch McConnell, who's in a very important position to be an ally. But we finally got the big logjam in the House was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte of Virginia, and we finally made some adjustments in the bill. And so he's co-sponsoring our industrial hemp bill, which means we'll probably get it through in the next couple of months. So I'm very, very excited about that. So look, there's things we continue to work on. Mostly I've been, moved by, again, the level of public participation, right? So your communications to my office has increased 5-fold. We've done our best to keep up. Hopefully you get responses quickly. I do my best writing them on the plane ride back and forth to try to talk to your comments, but it's great. I mean, it's everything from postcards to letters to emails to calls. We would have voted the right way on these things anyway, but they really helped make a difference in what happened nationally. Nothing happened in a vacuum. This wasn't just the 3 senators that opposed healthcare reform deciding without any public input that this was the wrong way for our country to replace the Affordable Care Act with something worse. It was also them hearing from all of their constituents. And I can tell you in my office, it was, I think we got over 12,000 communications of different forms saying don't repeal the Affordable Care Act without an actual response, and only something like 100 or 200 saying vote for this repeal. So I mean, completely overwhelmed. Very different than when we were passing the Affordable Care Act, when it was roughly even. People were having, and in town halls it was mostly opposed people that would come at that point. And we scheduled more, when people were angry, we said, and they were turning out, we said, well, let's give them the opportunity to hear their point. And more often than not, they were opposed to the Affordable Care Act for something that wasn't even in it at that time. And they said, I'm against it because it has death penalties. And we said, well, the point I made was it's fine if you don't agree with the policy, but at least oppose it because it's something that's actually in it, not something that's not in it. And so we tried to, and I think hopefully we had some impact on educating people, and not that everybody agreed with the policy by any means, but hopefully at least there could be an intelligent discussion about it. So with that, we'll open it up. This is really your meeting. I'm here to hear what's on your mind. Mara will be our MC. We'll also get to a few live questions from the floor after we get to some of the categorized questions as well.
Great. Our first set of questions is going to be about infrastructure. Lisa Bowen and Martin Bukowski. And I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. So if you can stand up, make yourself known, introduce, come on. Everybody's in. And Lisa? Perfect.
And so we'll listen to 2 at once, and then I'll if you want me to try and comment or answer both.
Good afternoon. I'm really concerned about the infrastructure, the bridges, the streets, the roads, and And especially considering the kind of weather events that we have in the state. Do you know of any provisions that are being made to that? I guess you addressed that already in your intro.
Hi, Seth. Sorry. Hi, so this is a local area question. I guess, what actions have you taken so far, will you take in the future to make sure that the RTD Northwest Rail line will be completed before 2042?
So, that's a very good question. That it should be, and if you don't know about it coming in, you're going to be very upset about this going out once we tell you what's going on. First, yeah, we really need an infrastructure investment in this country. There's several hundred unsafe bridges beyond their life expectancy. We all have seen great front range population growth, and we know our own local issues on infrastructure. It's why I really hope, and I don't want to be too much of a naysayer, but I hope that Congress can get its act together and do a national infrastructure package. But I'm just not holding my breath, and it's, in this particular case, not even President Trump's fault. I think he would probably sign anything to reach his desk on this just because he wants to talk about it. It's Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. I don't think those guys have it in them to spend money on infrastructure. I mean, they're increasing the military spending up through the wazoo, cutting everything else. So I'd love to be proven wrong, I really would, but I'm skeptical that this Congress will live up to that. I hope we do, I really do. So in 2002, voters in our area, in the RTD region, approved fast tracks, which committed to, among other projects, a Northwest Rail corridor through Boulder from Denver with an extension to Longmont on rail. Delivery date, 2017. That's what the delivery date was. And as I tell them when they come meet with me, and they do, and it's one of the few areas that I raise my voice on, because it's really upsetting, because you've all been paying the tax for it ever since it passed. You've been paying the tax for 15 years, and we've gotten nothing. And I understand, you know, I come from business, I understand that there's cost overruns. Like, it's reasonable to come and say, oh, it's 2019, you know, it's going to be 3 years late, 2020. That enough would be, you know, a scandal, and we'd say why, and we'd live with it. But they're telling us 2041. 2041 before they complete the project that they were slated to complete in 2017. It is just not acceptable, completely unacceptable. So, we've all been paying taxes on it for a while. And, you know, obviously they leverage it and they try to give us a few more buses, and that's fine, you know, and some improvements, and we all, you know, appreciate whatever interim measures that they do. But it is committed in the actual ballot initiative wording to deliver this in the Northwest Corridor. And so it's very important for everybody to hold RTD accountable. RTD has their own elected board. Now, it's a regional thing, so that means in South Denver and Denver and all these other areas which did get what they were promised also elect board members to RTD. But so does this area. So it's a very important office, and it's a very important public enterprise with a very large budget. So I would encourage everybody to be attentive and hold RTD accountable. 2041 is not acceptable. Let's have a real discussion. Is it 2022? Is it 2021? When is it? Where can you find the money for projects that were not promised in that initiative to give priority to projects for people in Boulder County who've been paying taxes for 15 years and just haven't seen what was promised?
Sergeant, and my question is actually about the deficit. You know, the military budget was big before, bigger than the next 6 countries put together. And then this new proposal just makes no sense whatsoever. I know that the Democratic side is doing what they can, but it's just mass insanity as far as I can tell. There's got to be other ways to do this. I don't know, flat tax, so that it cuts out all those crazy exemptions. I don't know. Something's got to happen. This is to leave our children and their children with this kind of debt. It's crazy.
Good afternoon. Sorry. My question has to do with, we've seen an increase in population here, but we haven't seen an increase in jobs. Especially, I have a daughter who's graduated from college, and she's a junior web developer, and the market's flooded with senior developers who are coming from the East and West Coast, but she lives here, she grew up here, and she wants a job here.
So, go ahead, one more.
You got our tax cut. Could you go into that a little bit deeper? How the industrial tax cut business by reducing about 15%. And reduction for middle class personnel really is important. How do we get there?
Good question. So first on the deficit, when I first came to Congress, I didn't support this. I just said, let's balance the budget. After a few years, I said, you know what? I don't think Congress ever will balance the budget unless we have a balanced budget amendment. So now I sponsor one. There's a number of Democrats and Republicans who do. In Denver, they have to balance it every year. For the state, they do. I don't think Congress will unless they have to. So I want to continue to push to get that in the Constitution. It has some flexibility built in if there's a national emergency and 2/3 of Congress agrees and all of that stuff. But I don't think they will otherwise, because what you're going to see, and what you are seeing now, is the Republican budget increases defense spending by about $80 billion. Now on paper, they're proposing a similar amount of cuts on the non-defense side. I guarantee you they're not going to do those because they're too harsh even for them. They put them on paper in vague terms. They include in the 10-year budget things like replacing Medicare with a voucher that would leave seniors $5,000 out of pocket. They build, so it's a budget assumption that they build in for like years 7, 8, 9, and 10, but they never pass the policies to do it. It's just kind of fake math, it's fake budget. So what happens is the deficit goes up, and that's exactly what's going to happen because they're spending money now, pretending like there'll be savings because we look at a 10-year horizon in years 7, 8, 9. They're funding military projects that the military itself says they don't need. The military comes in, we don't need that, and then some of it is, you know, it's in this district, it's pork, it's in this district, it's pork. But they're funding it above and beyond the levels that the generals tell us that we even need. So it really is money we don't have, and frankly, it's when you spend beyond your means, it makes you less secure rather than more secure because you're making our nation economically beholden to China and Saudi Arabia, two large foreign holders of our debt. And that makes us less secure as a country, not more secure. Well, just one example, I tried to go into the Appropriations Committee with a cut on our nuclear arsenal. We have a nuclear arsenal capable of destroying the world 5 to 7 times. And I said, why don't we cut it down to twice, as in killing every life, man, woman, and child on the planet twice enough, and it didn't pass. But it is, you know, if it's a deterrent, obviously, God forbid, there is a nuclear war, but as a deterrent, it should be sufficient to blow up the world twice. I don't know what good it does to say you're going to blow it up more than that. You know, in the job market, we have jobs. The problem is we have a raising cost of living in the area, and many of the jobs that we do have don't keep up with the housing costs, particularly in the Denver metro area. You know, people have whined about Boulder forever, but it's not just Boulder. It's Denver, it's Louisville, it's Lafayette, it's Longmont, right? It's places that we even used to think of as somewhat affordable. And so it's a match between the two. So, I mean, the point being, while the job market and unemployment are low, the problem is not everybody is benefiting from that, and not everybody is getting ahead, frankly. I mean, people feel they're working harder and falling behind because there's something they don't have a job, many people do, but it buys less because their rent is increased at 15% or 10%, or they want to buy a home and the mortgage that they have, or they have to live and commute 30 miles instead of 10 miles to work, and all of the time that takes. It's a complicated problem, and frankly, some of the solutions are at the local level in terms of zoning and transportation planning in communities. Certainly nationally in terms of economic growth, which leads to the last question, because one of the things we can do to create more jobs and economic growth would be tax reform on the corporate side. So America, corporations are taxed at 35%, among the highest rate in the world. Very problematic for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it leads to a lot of outshoring, offshoring, and companies that are setting up shop overseas just for tax reasons. Now, if they do it for other reasons, there's other areas we need to look at, but they are currently companies that just do it for tax reasons. So tax reform, President Obama supported bringing that down on a revenue neutral basis to around 28%. We have also have proposals to do it on a revenue neutral basis to 25% of the corporate tax rate. So it's somewhere, I think, by getting rid of loopholes and special interest provisions. Oil and gas industry alone has $100 billion over 10 years of special interest loopholes, including being able to depreciate the same well multiple times in that. So you take all that from and you bring down rates, you can probably get it around 25%. President Trump proposed 15%. The problem with that is it increases the deficit. It's all deficit spending. So yes, it would lead to, on the margins, more economic growth. But you don't need to be the price leader in taxes. If you're at 25%, you're mid-upper range in global economy. 35% is off the chart. There's desperate countries that say 0% or 10%, please come here, please come here. 50% would be nice, but the question is, can we afford it? So I think we should do it in a revenue neutral way, and I think the number is probably around 25%, which is, to their credit, what House Republicans are at least talking about. And maybe it's a lower number and we get revenue somewhere else, but I don't think we should go in further debt to do that now. But that more economic growth as well, because it would stop some of the companies that are moving offshore for tax reasons for doing that.
Okay, thank you. My question is on climate change. So President Trump has announced that they're pulling out of the Paris Accord. But I've heard a lot of discussion about rejoining that. So my question is, am I just an incurable optimist, or is there really some hope in my next years?
Hi, thank you for being here. Yes, climate change, I believe, is probably the biggest issue we have. Climate change is probably the biggest issue that we have. I think I'm concerned with gerrymandering, I'm concerned with Medicare, but climate change is my children and my grandchildren. And I'm wondering, so many different places in the country now are saying, we're not going to go with you, we are going to run our own game here and continue to do what we know is right. Is that being done here, and what can we do more on?
My question is on mining and drilling in regards to our public and parklands. How do we protect them from this current administration?
Those are all very good questions. So the Environmental Protection Agency has a two-front assault on it. One is the head of the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't even seem to believe in the mission of the agency, and also doesn't look at the science and reach the same conclusion that scientists reach, that climate change is real and caused by human activity. The second tier is they're going after the funding of the agency and their ability, even of the career civil servants, from doing their job from their congressional mandate to keep our air and water clean. So we're going to do everything we can to defend it. Again, keep in mind that the agency, like most, are staffed with career civil servants who are obligated to follow the law, regardless of what the executive branch said. They're mandated by Congress with particular tasks. We worry about President Trump proposed over 30% budget cuts, very draconian for that agency. I don't think it'll be that bad. I think it'll be, they're going to cut them, but I don't think it'll be at that level. And we, sometimes we Democrats have a seat at the table, because if the Republicans can't pass their own funding bill, because it's never harsh enough for some of them, right, on the far extreme, and this is what happened with the funding bill for the cycle we're in now. They had 30, 40 of them that said, you're not cutting enough from the EPA and other agencies. And then Democrats say, fine, we'll support a cleaner funding bill if you have a more reasonable approach, and then we can then pass a bipartisan funding bill. So that's possible. With Trump pulling out of Paris, the work continues, and frankly, I've been moved by part of the response, and really we have cities and states and private sector businesses stepping up. 2 weeks ago in Washington, a newly formed coalition, just after President Trump pulled out of Paris, of 40 major American businesses that themselves are keeping to the Paris goals, came and met with us, including Nike and many others. I think it was just last week, Vail Resorts in Broomfield, and operating resorts across the Mountain West, announced that they're going to go to 100% renewable energy. So it's continuing to happen. Cities are having this discussion. Pueblo, Colorado is going to do 100% renewable energy by 2035. Aspen, Colorado already has 100% renewable energy. It's the first city in the country. So it continues. Just because of the void of national leadership doesn't mean that we can't continue the work, and that kind of goes to that question too. In fact, our local work becomes even more important than ever before. So state level leadership, county level leadership, municipal leadership, and the private sector in the absence of leadership from Washington, will make truly all the difference. I just introduced a bill in the House to have 100% renewable energy nationally by 2050. It's called 100 by 50. It's a bill that has the roadmap for our country to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. And we have details about it at polis.house.gov, so you can look that up. Given the current composition of Congress, we're not holding our breath on that, right? We count our victories. We get the Industrial Hemp Farming Act bill to the President. That's what we're very excited. We're not going to get 100% by 2050. I'm being realistic, but we want to put that out there so that a future Congress in the right composition will actually get that bill done. Drilling in our public lands, and so of all the things that President Trump is doing that could harm our environment, gutting the EPA and removing us from the climate accords internationally, those things are, there's a loss in the short term, but we can always come back and we can change our decision. But if there's one thing that some people are trying to do that would be permanent, and that would be the privatization of our public lands. If they pull that off, there's no going back. We're never going to be able to, once again, and our public lands are our pride, our heritage in the West. They're an important part of our quality of life. They're important for carbon sequestration. They're important for driving our tourism economy. And so that, in many ways, while all of these debates are important, that one you can't go back from. So we hope to stop them from doing that, and so far we have. However, they certainly are opening up our public lands to additional drilling, removing the safeguards like the methane rule that President Obama put in place. We try every time to force votes in Congress to stop them. We don't have a majority in Congress that feels that way. In fact, the Republican majority is very much in line with President Trump in removing the few safeguards we have from drilling on our public lands. So it's not a good situation. We have to make sure they don't privatize or sell off those public lands, and we have to elect people that will reinstitute strong land use and clean air and clean water standards for our public lands.
I've come just to thank you for having to fight before your governor's office day after day after day to try to get him to change his mind. And if we hadn't had McCain to come back from this deathbed to help, we would be stuck with this mess. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your staff. I admit I'm a Bernie girl, and I'm hoping that we can get Medicare for all.
Congressman, thank you. I just want to know what we can do to try to protect Medicare and Social Security. I'm just afraid it seems to be an agenda item for Paul Marine in particular. And I'm afraid seniors won't be able to turn out in the fashion that all Americans did for the health